So thank you everyone for spending some time with me this evening. I
Oh,
do want to preface this. I have not given this talk in a year and a half. You were my first Underground Railroad talk since COVID hit and everything. So if I stutter, start, things like that, I apologize. I'll get back into the flow of things pretty quickly with it. But yeah, I just realized I had this look at the slides this morning to remind myself what I was going to talk about. I am a state employee. So I hope those of you from Indiana who pay taxes, when you get done, you'll think your taxes are doing something worthwhile. I'm going to talk about the Underground Railroad, but remember, it's over 300 years of history. So I'm not going to be able to talk about every person, place, or event. What I hope to give you is more of an understanding of the type of people who participated, some of the things they may have done, and get rid of some myths and legends about the Underground Railroad. I do work in the Department of Natural Resources, and a lot of people are like, why does DNR care about Underground Railroad and the preservation of the story? Well, it stems from a 1966 law called the Historic Preservation Act, and it required each state to create a state preservation office. And in Indiana, they put us in DNR, and it makes sense because we have responsibilities to the National Park Service, and the Park Service is under the Department of Interior. That's their main one, and then Park Service is under it. Same way with us. We're a part of DNR. I will call my office the Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology, but I'm going to say DHPA because it is easier than the Department of Natural Resources Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology. So just know if I say DHPA, that's my office. I will talk about at the end why we're doing Underground Railroad Initiative, but just know that, we are part of DNR, and there's this one division that deals with the preservation of the built environment instead of the natural environment. Now, before we can talk about why someone would run, we need to talk a little bit about slavery and get some understanding of some things. I don't know if you've ever seen this drawing before, but this is the ideal way that slave catchers moved their cargo, people, from Africa to the New World. These individuals are lying down on platforms. And so just think of it as a platform of people and just kind of continue like this, because the hunters, the slave traders did not make any money if their cargoes arrived dead. And so they wanted the best way to transport individuals. I will tell you, though, that so many people died on these ships that the sharks used to follow the slave ships as they came across the ocean. They came mainly from the western part of Africa, but all parts of Africa were used and hunted for individuals. Most people came into slavery through kidnappings. Some were, came in through prisoners of war and being sold in by other individuals and things like that. But the vast majority were kidnapped, put on ships like this, and brought to the New World. Now, don't just think of this as a Southern United States thing, because every colony and every piece of land from Canada all the way down to Argentina and everywhere in between allowed for slavery. It's just some made it illegal sooner than others. And it was not just in the Southern United States, because in the colonies of New York and Massachusetts, they allowed for slavery. So again, don't think of it just as a Southern United States thing. It was a world event. And we could talk about world slavery, but again, I only got an hour for 300 years of US history. Now, as an enslaved person, you had no control over your life. And so you didn't have any control over where you lived, who you married, who you lived with, what your job was, and you were never paid for your labor. And so think about that as I'm talking about some things that runaways would do, and think to yourself, well, how did they do that? How did they pay for that? Because no one ever paid them for their labor. They were bought and sold like commodities, like cattle, things like that. And so as historians, we need to think in that mindset so that we can get into the right documents. And what I mean by that is very few people today can just afford to buy a home. And so what do? You mortgage it. Well, a lot of individuals could not just afford to purchase someone, so they would mortgage them. So we're looking at bank records to see about how many people were being purchased and sold and things like that from a plantation. You insure your house. They insured their slaves. And so I found this is from a Kentucky newspaper from the time period that they're insuring slaves and ensuring whether if they run away, things like that. So if I have a runaway and I can't find them, I can collect on my insurance claim. And so these are the kinds of kind of new documents that we're looking at, and companies every once in a while, a life insurance company will find in their basement documents related to slavery, and then they'll release them, and it gives us a whole new wealth of information about those who ran. And now let's talk a little bit about Indiana. You get most people at this time period, if you ask them if slavery was wrong, they probably would have said yes, but that's all they would have done about it. There never would have been a thought about it. They wouldn't have done anything. They would have gone about their daily lives and never given it a moment's thought. And then you have people who would go to anti-slavery meetings. This is a meeting for LaPorte County in 1842. We had early in the 1830s, we started getting county anti-slavery societies, and you would go to these society meetings and listen to someone talk about the evils of slavery. You might write a letter to the editor. You might write a letter to your congressman. So many letters went to Congress that eventually Congress put down a gag order, which they would no longer read letters related to slavery. They were just sick of reading them, and so because groups like this would write so many letters to their legislators trying to get slavery ended legally. You might be a minister who preached on the pulpit about the evils of slavery. So all of these people who are doing these things to legally end slavery are abolitionists. Now, you cannot confuse abolition with Underground Railroad, because they would not have. An abolitionist probably thought the Underground Railroad people were radical, crazy. They were ruining the whole movement by doing these illegal things. And so most people who would attend an anti-slavery meeting would not cross over that line and do that illegal activity, because helping a fugitive was illegal. This federal Constitution does not use the word slave or slavery, but there are 10 provisions dealing with the enslavement of people. And the first law that allowed for the recapture of a fugitive slave was signed in 1793 by George Washington. And so it made it illegal to help someone. And so anti-slavery people, abolitionists, were working towards the legal end of slavery, not necessarily willing to break those laws. And then we get another group of people that we need to deal with. They're called the colonizationists. These individuals may or may not have been anti-slavery, but they didn't want blacks living in this country. And so their solution was bought land in Africa, Liberia, it's a country that still exists today, and raised money to send individuals to Africa. It's not popular within the African-American community, but it's something that happened. And it's really interesting that you can get a colonizationist and an Underground Railroad agent being the same person. So they might want slavery to end, might be willing to break the law to have slavery end, but they don't want that free person living in Indiana or actually in anywhere in the United States. And so it's another group of people that you need to look at and study and understand what they were up to, so that we have a better understanding of the moment. Now, if you ran, you were going to be chased. You were valuable property, and so you would be chased by bounty hunters. The bounty hunters were usually men in the communities where the plantation farm we can use interchangeably. The average number of enslaved people on a farm was 7. So don't think of Tara and Gone with the Wind. Think of a small farm with 5-6 individuals who they're enslaving that way. And so when you left, you were going to be chased. The problem was that not only were you going to be chased by bounty hunters who made more money than by capturing one fugitive than they could being a farmer, and they would chase you all over the country legally. They were chasing you, they could come into Indiana legally and hunt you down because of the federal law. But you also had people in Indiana who were willing to help out these slave catchers, and they would be ads in the paper. And I can find these ads everywhere from Evansville up to the Fort Wayne, DeKalb County papers there, I'm sure if I looked into the Grant County papers, I would find them there. It was a reward ad saying, my slave Sam has left, he's wearing these clothes, looks like this, and I will give you $1,500 for his return. It's about $40,000 today. So you imagine being a Hoosier living outside of Marion, and in 1840, you can come up with $50,000 or $1,400 at the time for just turning someone in who you didn't know, who was breaking the law, both state and federal laws, and who you probably had racist attitudes about. And so a slave coming into Indiana did not know who was going to help them or who was going to turn them in. So that was a problem that they would have to deal with. But you could come to Indiana. We're a free state, right? Sort of. The Northwest Ordinance, which created the Indiana Territory, had an article in it, Article 6, said no slavery northwest of the Ohio River. But I can tell you that people over here in Knox County, this area right over here, which is where the territorial capital was, Vincennes, lots of individuals being enslaved. When we became a state in 1816, our state constitution says no slavery in the state. But I can tell you again that in 1820, back over here in Knox County, a woman named Polly sued for her freedom because she was being held as a slave. And that case went all the way to the state Supreme Court. Now, at the time, the state Supreme Court was down here in Harrison County because Corydon was the state capital at the time. So the guys down here on the Supreme Court ruled that Polly was free because slavery was illegal in Indiana. So Polly moves back to Knox County. She moves back over to here to Knox County, and we can prove 5 years later she's still being held as a slave because the guys in Knox County really didn't care what the guys down in Harrison County had to say about slavery. Another way we had slavery in the state is by, I could live along the Ohio River. Maybe I live in New Albany. It's right down here in Floyd County, and right across the river is Louisville. And so I could go over to Louisville and tell a slave owner, I need about 5 guys to come work my farm. You send your 5 guys over, I pay you for their time, and that's slavery in Indiana. And then we just have people just kind of all over the place. We can find them enumerated in the census in the 1840s, still as slavery. So while we had free blacks in the state, we also had slavery in the state. And we also had fugitive slaves. One of my first and one of my favorite Underground Railroad or slave running cases is over here in Wayne County, just north of Richmond. And Peter left his plantation in 1821. I have no idea what he was doing between 21 and 24, but in 1824, he's living in Wayne County, has changed his name, and is just living his life. The bounty hunter, who I am going to start, I've actually started like reading up on them and trying to figure who they are, because they know things that I don't understand how they know. Of all the places to go, they went to Little Richmond, Indiana, which today we think, oh, well, all the Quakers, that's why it was so popular, Levi Coffin over there. But at the time, that was not what it was. But they knew that's where he would go, and that's where he was. And they went over there, waited for Peter. When he came into town to do some shopping, they arrested him. And state law, now while state law said you can't have slavery in Indiana, and the federal law said they can extradite them back, state law said, okay, but here's the extradition process. So you have to get the owner to identify this person and take them in front of the local magistrate. So they put Peter in jail and go back to Kentucky to get the owner. And so while we wait, and this is what the court case says, a violent mob of Quakers, which I love because we think all the Quakers are passive and non-aggressive, but apparently these guys weren't. My mob was only 2 guys. That was a gentleman and his son-in-law. They broke Peter out of jail. They beat up the jailer, broke Peter out of jail, and he's gone. Now we hope Peter found freedom. I don't know where he ran to. He probably changed his name again because he had changed his name when he came here. So we just hope he found some freedom. But what's left are my 2 Quakers. Now, what do I do with them? Well, the federal law that George Washington signed in 1793 allowed for them to be sued in civil court. And that's what happened, is that the owners sued them both for loss of property. And in 1825, they were both found guilty and each ordered to pay $1,500. So Peter's owner got $3,000 for the inconvenience of his loss of property. So remember, in Indiana, we have free blacks and lots of free black settlements, but we also have fugitive slaves, and all living in the state at the same time. Now, when we first started doing our research, this is the map that we use. Now, this map was created by a professor from Ohio State University, and I hate this map. And when I get done explaining why, you too will hate this map. So the professor, how he did his research, his methodology, is he wrote every postmaster in the United States and said, tell me about the Underground Railroad in your community. And so they would write something back and say, okay, talk to Joe. And so that he'd write Joe and say, hey, Joe, tell me about it. And Joe would tell stories and say, okay, also talk to John. And the letters back and forth and back and forth. Well, think about who are the postmasters in the United States in the 1880s when he started doing this research. They're white men. So this map shows what white men knew about what other white men were doing. And I know this because the letters still exist. All of his documentation still exists. And there's a copy of it at the Indiana State Library. So you can come down to the state library, look on microfilm, and see all the letters that he goes back and forth with different people about what was happening. And when you read through it, apparently we women didn't do anything, but you know we were the ones feeding these individuals when they came to the house, and medical care and new clothes and things like that. And it doesn't talk about African Americans hardly at all. So it's a good start of a map, but it's not a complete map. Second reason I hate this map is it implies that there are routes. I literally mean like straight routes, that every time that you come into down here in Madison, that you went to Columbus and then you went to Indianapolis. And we just know that's not true for a variety of reasons. Weather, bridges are gone, too much snow, just a variety of things happen. Individuals die, they move, they stop participating. And then the biggest one are those bounty hunters. Again, I don't know how they knew it, but they knew who was participating in the Underground Railroad, and they used to stake out people's homes. Because they didn't make any money turning them in, they made money capturing fugitive slaves. And so if we know that I always go to Rhonda's house from my house, but we know her house is being taken over by or being watched by fugitive bounty hunters, why would we go that way? We wouldn't. We're going to go another way. And so think of it more of a web of potential paths, not just these straight lines that this is where it always has to go. And then the third reason I hate this map is that it implies the people in Lawrenceburg, way down here on the are working at the same time as the people up here in Auburn. And again, settlement patterns and how people are doing things like that. We just know that's not true. So it's a good map to start with. It gives you some guidance on some things, but it's not the end all be all. And we took this map back in 2000 when we started, and has blown up how much information that we have from there. Now, if you're going to find freedom, you've got to go to Canada, right? Well, not necessarily. Does it make more sense if you're in Georgia to go to Canada or southern Florida, where the Seminole Indians are, who are in conflict with U.S. government and allowed individuals to be free? Or if you're in Texas, makes more sense to go to Canada or Mexico. Mexico ended their slavery in 1826, allowed American slaves in and were free and became Mexican citizens. So people might go south. You might go west into the parts of the country that haven't been as settled by white European Americans. And so you can kind of live out there. And then my favorite place is Alaska. When I heard Alaska had an Underground Railroad initiative, I thought, God, that's a long walk. But if you look at their research, it's really quite fascinating. You get whaling ships who will go into the ports of New Orleans or New York or Boston and sell their goods. And then slaves would just hop on board and sail away. Sometimes they stayed on those ships as sailors, but sometimes they went all the way up to Alaska, and there are communities of descendants of runaway slaves in Alaska. So don't just think Canada. But we in Indiana like Canada because if they can't come into Canada, they probably might be coming through Indiana. And if they're coming through Indiana, maybe they went through Grant County. So if you're going to come north through Indiana, the first thing you got to do is get over the Ohio River. So how do you do that? You could have someone row you across. You could swim across. You could steal a boat and row yourself across. We have lots of examples of individuals who would row you across from Kentucky over to Indiana. My favorite is a gentleman named Freeman Anderson, and Freeman was living across from the Hanover College area, so over by Madison, and he would almost every night row somebody across, watch them get off, run back towards freedom. What I find fascinating about him is he himself was enslaved, and this is actually what we're finding is that the enslaved community was helping each other, was the start of the Underground Railroad, because if they weren't helping each other, individuals wouldn't be able to get moving and get moving north. And so something about Freeman's life that every night he come home and go back to his plantation. Eventually, though, he did free himself and rowed himself across and never came back. You might have somebody in Indiana row across and get you, and we have lots of examples up and down the river of that. You might come across on one of these ships. There are ships every day from New Orleans to up the river and Louisville over to New Albany, Jeffersonville, Clarksville, places like that. And there are letters in the paper, lots of letters in the Louisville paper complaining that the the captain and their crew are not asking for passes. Slaves to be off plantation would have to have a pass, something like this. Now, this one's not from Indiana. It's from Virginia, or it's not from Kentucky, but it's from Virginia. But the slave would have to carry something like this if they were doing business for their owner, because if a patrol stopped them and said, "Who are you? Where are you going? Why are you off plantation?" they could show this letter and say, "Look, I'm doing business for my boss or for my owner." If the captain and them did not ask for this, then slaves could come over to Indiana and not have business to do and not be expected to come back and start their way. Now, we don't know if the captains were sympathetic, whether they were just couldn't care less, they were just trying to run their boat, whether they're being bribed to ignore it, but we just know that this was seen as a problem. And then the last way across the river is to walk across it, because we have changed the river so much that the river today is not the river of the 1850s. In the summer, it would dry up enough that there were parts of the river that were like waist, not even waist high, knee high. And so you could walk across that way. And in the winter, it froze solid and you would have this ice bridge. And so whichever way, however you're going to get across, you're going to get across and you're going to start your voyage north. Now, the most infamous Hoosier, not really a Hoosier, he's from North Carolina, it's Levi Coffin. He and his wife, Catherine, moved up to Indiana through the Great Quaker Migration. They settled just north of Richmond and built this house. That's all I'm going to say about Levi, because this is a state historic site. It's a part of the state museum system. You can go visit it. They have a great, next door to this house, they've got a great visitor center with a video, and it's just wonderful. And so let's talk about people no one else talks about. So if you come across in Madison, you're going to go into the neighborhood called Georgetown. Now, if you've never been to Madison, go. It is my favorite town in the entire state, and it is spectacular because in these neighborhoods in the area where we're talking about 70-75% of the buildings are from this time period. So you're seeing the same buildings that a fugitive would have seen. They would have come into Georgetown, which was the free Black neighborhood. And that's what we're finding in Indiana, is that it was the free Black community along the rivers who started the Underground Railroad in Indiana. And it makes sense, because if a fugitive came into my home, I look like the people enslaving them. So why would they trust me? Because I say, honest, I'm here to help? Well, maybe not. So they could go into the free Black community, find a respite, so like a break, find directions, because they would not have known where they were going, which direction to go to get to the next house, things like that. And the people in the Black community knew who in the white community could be trusted. So they could come in here, take a break, and then get moving north. One of my favorite people in this area, he lived in the middle house there with the portico porch, and it was Elijah Anderson. Now, Elijah was a free Black. We think parts of the house that he actually built, and he is our Harriet Tubman. So when I talk to fourth grade teachers about Underground Railroad history, Harriet Tubman is an important character in U.S. history. She needs to be taught, but she never stepped foot in Indiana. So we can talk about what she did, which is she would go down on the plantations and arrange for groups of people to come off, and then say, and then in Indiana, we had Elijah. So Elijah would go down to Kentucky, wander from plantation to plantation, see who wants to go off, and then he'd arrange these groups and they'd gone. The bounty hunters and the plantation owners knew what he was doing, couldn't catch him, but he did have a bounty on his head, wanted dead or alive. In 1841, we call it the Kentucky Mob. A group of Kentuckians came over to Madison to try to break up this Underground Railroad cell. And they beat up a lot of people, tried to drown a few people in the river. Elijah decided it was time to leave Indiana. He eventually moved to Lawrenceburg for a bit, and then eventually to Cleveland to work on the end of the Underground Railroad, getting people across over to Canada. But he still came back to Kentucky to make these arrangements with groups of people off the plantation. Unfortunately, one of the times he was captured and sent to the Frankfort Penitentiary. Well, because he was captured and went through basically the Department of Corrections, he has an intake. He has an intake file, which is still available at the Kentucky State Archives. So I know so much about him. I know whether he could read it right, whether he drank alcohol, scars that he had, how tall he was. So there's a lot about him. And you're all genealogists, so you know that if you had something about your ancestor from 1845, more than a birth date and a death date, you're ecstatic. And I was just tickled when I found this intake on Elijah, because it told us so much about him. Now, he did die in prison. If you ask anybody in Madison, they will tell you that he was murdered. There's no evidence one way or the other. The prison records basically say he was found dead in his cell. And so I don't know. There were other Black Hoosiers in that same prison for the same offense. So I don't know how he died, but again, every time I go down to Madison, they're like, Jeannie, you know that's what it was. And I'm like, find me proof, and then I will say it. You might run into George DeBaptiste. He's one of those people who would row you across, another free Black who eventually moved to Detroit to do his work there. And he was kind of very interesting and important character in Detroit heritage and Detroit history after the war. And you come across to New Albany, and the Underground Railroad's a little different. Now, normally when I say Underground Railroad, it's not underground and it's not a railroad. This is not a subway system. You'd be surprised at how many people think it sort of is. It's basically people helping people. It's giving them a place to sleep. It's giving them some food, maybe medical attention, change of clothes if they need it, and directions to the next house that will give them the exact same thing. It's also not the hidey holes and tunnels that we all think about. There's actually only one documented tunnel in all of the United States, and it's up in New York, in upstate New York. So, you know, when most people, they'll tell me, oh, there's this tunnel from here to here, things like that, or there's fake walls and false walls. There's a lot of other ways that those can be explained. And you have to think about the practical use of some of these things, that it just wouldn't make sense for those to be there. But in New Albany, when I say railroad, Underground Railroad, I mean the railroad. So imagine your trip from New Albany to Indianapolis takes me 2 hours to drive in my car. So imagine running that whole distance or getting on a train and riding that distance, because the first trains in Indiana went from the Ohio River north to the state capitol. And so while they're moving goods, I could hide in the baggage car. I could pass as white, possibly. I could bribe someone to ignore that I'm there, and my trip would be easier. And because of things like the Underground Railroad and help and transportation like this and not having to run, it changes the face of the slave. And what I mean by that is in the 1820s, we're of having young men ages 15 to 20 or 18 to 25 as the average age of a runaway. By the time of the Civil War, we're finding 10 and 11-year-old girls being caught on the Underground Railroad that are running by themselves. And it's because of this help that they get. We've got a woman in Decatur County, which is in southeastern Indiana, who when she was caught, it was her and her 5 children, ages like 5 to 12. I can't imagine doing that run, being chased also at the same time. But it's because of the help that they are getting that's going to make something like that possible. Whereas before it was straight up just running the whole thing. All right, we come across at Evansville. You might run into Ira Caswell. Ira is he's a conductor. Now I said it's not a railroad, but we use railroading terms. Conductors move packages from station to station. These are actually not words that historians created. These are words that they were using at the time period. And so sometimes they would send letters saying, I just want to let you know there's 3 packages coming next week. Just wanted you to be prepared to receive them. So they would put those kinds of things in letters to each other. So Ira was a conductor. He helped people find that next spot to get food and rest and things like that. But the other thing he used to do is walk up and down the Ohio River looking for bounty hunters, because bounty hunters moving up and down the Ohio River looking for people crossing. And if Ira found a bounty hunter, he'd beat them up. So, something different to do. Now I'm moving you all across the state, talking about different people. Don't assume these people knew each other. We're not working together, things like that. I'm just trying to give you different examples. Now, just north of Madison is Lancaster, and there's Eleutherian College. I talk about this community for a couple of reasons. Normally in a county, if I have more than 10 people, really if I have more than 5 people total for the entire run of the Underground Railroad, that's a lot of people. Because not a lot of people participated. It was illegal activity. A lot of people thought it was morally wrong. A lot of people just couldn't have cared less. But so very few people were willing to participate and break the law. But here in Lancaster, this entire community, they were in the Carolinas. They were tired of living around slavery. They were Anabaptists, so they moved up to Lancaster and created this Underground Railroad community. And the last time I talked to the researchers down there, they're up to like 25 families that they can document. There were activities and stuff. And within each family, there might be 5-10 people. So there's a lot of people doing work on this within this community. The other thing they did is they built Eleutherian. Now, Eleutherian primarily was a school, an elementary school, to taught people how to read and write, but they did have all the way up to college classes, which is why they call it Eleutherian College. Interesting thing about Eleutherian is that it educated men, women, whites, blacks in the same classroom at the same time. This in the 1840s, 1848 was when they opened, was unheard of, except one other place in the entire world. And that's Randolph County, Indiana. There that they had the Union Literary Institute was there, and they were doing the same thing. Men, women, whites, blacks, same classroom, same time. And so Indiana in the 1840s was on the cutting edge of education. Now, the Hoyts were a family that participated in the Eleutherian group in the Underground Railroad. And I talk about them for family dynamics. The daughter in the 1930s started writing to historians saying, "You're not talking about my dad, what he was doing. Let me tell you what he did." So when she was a child, she shared a bedroom with her parents. And one night she woke up and dad was leaving the house. And so because she's a nosy kid, she went out and followed him to the barn. She got into the barn and there were 5 black men in the barn. And so she, scurried out. Her dad caught her, said, sat her down, told her what he was doing, and said, "You can't tell anybody," because they could go to jail. They could lose property for the civil suits. It was violent. The guy who published The Philanthropist, which was an anti-slavery newspaper. So all he did was print a newspaper saying slavery was illegal or was immoral. His office was firebombed twice and he was murdered. So there was a lot of violence that came around this. And so for the family, if she went to school and started blabbering about what she saw at school and at home that day, it could endanger the family. Now think about your children and all the things they've told strangers in the grocery store about life at home. So that's if you think about it in that way, you see a lot of Underground Railroad people not talking to their family and their children about what's going on. And so some, like Lyman, actually died before the Civil War, so he never got a chance to tell his family what he was doing. If his daughter wouldn't have experienced this, we may never have known. Other people never talked about it afterwards because it was the moral thing to do, and afterwards they didn't want to talk about it. So you get a lot of that going on, and a lot of we're helping families refine their history and their heritage by finding this history. Now, if I come up to Marion, you guys know where Marion is. It might come into the Weaver settlement. Now, the Weaver settlement is outside of Marion, a free black settlement. They have a very long oral tradition of Underground Railroad history. Unfortunately, though, we're not finding the primary documents to support some of the stories that are saying. So this is a continuing thing where we're looking for more stories or more documents to support their stories. But you have some communities that have no oral traditions, and then you have other communities having strong oral traditions. Problem with oral traditions, though, is that people sometimes lie, and my grandfather is the best example of this. I was the kid when I was little. I would go over to Grandma and Grandpa's, sit around the kitchen table, and I would be like, "Tell me stories, tell me about the family," because I've always been my own little genealogist. And so my grandfather used to tell us how we were part of the Heinz ketchup people, and that we helped start the company and doing all this stuff, and we were growing. I have some very vivid stories that I remember about growing horseradish behind an outhouse. So I grow up, I go to Ball State, get my history degree, learn how to do research, start the genealogy tree, and realize not only are we not from the Pittsburgh area, we didn't come to the United States until 1905, way after Heinz ketchup was started, and we had nothing to do with it. My grandpa lied to me. Now, why did he lie? Why did he make up stories? I don't know. He died when I was in 7th grade, so I can't ask him, why were you making these stories up? But people want to, people make up stories, and so sometimes that happens. With the Underground Railroad, they make up even more stories. And part of the reason they make up stories is because everybody wants to be the good guys. No one wants to be on the bad side of history. You don't want to be the family that owned slaves or that turned someone in for a reward or ignored the fact that something happened in your community. And it's so much easier to be the good guys. Oh, our family did this, our community did that. And so for us, it's very important to have the primary documents to back the stories that we're telling people about. Now, if you go up to Orland, you get my first Hoosiers who are being arrested under a new federal law. A lot of things are going on in the United States about slavery moving west, and which states are going to be free states and stuff like that. And we get the Compromise of 1850. A part of that is the new Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. It made, the one from 1793 didn't have much teeth. There was a lot of issues with it. So this new law made it a federal offense. It was criminal, no longer civil. There was federal marshals who were directed to do the arresting and the prosecution, things like that. So my first Hoosiers are from up in Orland. There's 5 guys who are arrested for helping Tom, Tim, and Alfred from their plantation in Kentucky. I don't know how Tom, Tim, and Alfred got from Kentucky all the way up to Orland, but that's where they're caught. The 5 guys are put on trial. 4 are found not guilty for a variety of reasons. There was some technicality issues and things like that. But one gentleman, Benjamin Waterhouse, was found guilty of violating the 1850 law 3 times for Tom, Tim, and Alfred. He could have gotten a huge fine and time in jail. He was given 30 minutes in jail and a $30 fine, which was upped eventually to $50. And so we're looking at the judge, because clearly the judge is anti-slavery, but staying within the law and doing the best he can. Now, this stint in jail did not affect Benjamin Waterhouse. He burned an effigy at rallies, bounty hunters. He posted in the newspapers about coming to his house and he would find help and things like that, and it was just pretty much a rabble rouser. Now, this house is one of the houses of one of the gentlemen who was found not guilty. Beautiful farmhouse, gorgeous farmhouse that looks like this today. And this is the problem that we have with the Underground Railroad, is that a lot of the buildings were not very preserved. They weren't kept. The building doesn't say anything about Underground Railroad activity. So if you call me and tell me, oh, this house here in Marion or, in Jonesboro or something like that was a part of the Underground Railroad, I'm going to say, that's nice. Who lived there? Let's talk about the people, because it's the people who did the work, and we'll decide whether they actually did the work. First, whether they participated at all, and second, whether they participated in that building. And that's kind of one of the things that we work on. All right, so if we go to Huntington, I also get told by people all the time, you can't do this research because it's impossible, because it was secretive. It's not as secretive as we think it is. I was reading the newspaper in Huntington for another project I was working on, and I came across a letter to the editor in the 1850s that said Reverend Chamberlain is running Negroes through his home and someone should do something about it. I'm like, who's Reverend Chamberlain? So he was a Baptist minister, hadn't been in town very long, and moved almost immediately after that. But clearly, neighbors knew what he was doing, and somebody passive aggressively wrote a letter to the editor about it. And so this is like in a downtown area, so neighbors knowing what neighbors are doing. But when you look at a lot of the prosecution cases of Underground Railroad activity, neighbors are nosy neighbors, like farm neighbors. Like the farms are 2 miles apart, and the person will have said, well, I noticed that they were bringing extra wood into the house, and that seemed odd, so I investigated further. Or I noticed they're brought food into the barn, and that just seemed odd. And so it's like, how long are you staring at someone's house to know that they're bringing in extra wood? But this is how their neighbors are telling on each other. So some people knew what their neighbors were doing, ignored it. Others testified in a case against them. So it's not as secretive as we think that they were. The problem is that the research, the documents sometimes just aren't there. And in Huntington and Wabash are a really good example of this. So in Huntington, the newspaper owner was pro-South. And what I mean by that is that he felt it was the South's right to own their slaves and that the North shouldn't do anything about it and just mind your own business. The Wabash editor was anti-slavery. And so there were things that would happen in Huntington, like there was a rally, an anti-slavery rally, and like 200 people showed up. It was not in the Huntington paper at all, not covered at all. It was covered in the Wabash paper. And so really, it's really important for us to do research outside of our counties. And so like in Marion, in Grant County in Marion, Nathan Cogshell is one of your, I think, best documented Underground Railroad activity people. It's actually some of the stuff we found in Huntington County, because people are talking about in diaries later in life as they're you know, being interviewed and things like that, about who sent you these individuals? Where did you get them from? He's like, well, Nathan. And so it was helpful for us to document what Nathan was doing by leaving the county. Sometimes you need to leave the state. There was a diary found in Nebraska that actually has been sent back to Indiana, but it was about Madison, Indiana, and the gentleman talking about all of his Underground Railroad activity from the 1840s and 1850s. But then the family after the war moved out to Kansas, and so it's coming back. Sometimes we need to go other places, like other countries like Canada. The fugitive slaves went up there, they were interviewed, many of them stayed after the war, and so there are documents there and things there that help document what we're doing here. If you're wanting to know more about Marion, you guys last year had Bill Munn come in and do the program. He's the researcher in Marion. He's done most of the research. We did a booklet that I have here. That's, I don't know how clear it is, but there's a booklet there. I think the library has a copy of it, and Bill's stuff is written up in there. We do need to do more research though, because this was from 2003, which seems like it was yesterday, but it's a long time ago. And so adding more information, doing more research would be a really nice thing to do. So it'd be nice to get all of his research updated to new things we found and stuff like that. Now, the blue part is the Kankakee Swamp or Kankakee Marsh. This area, if you go across 30 or up 65, it was all swampland and marshland, and there weren't roads through it until the 1850s, and so there's not settlement there, and so you don't have a lot of activity. But where you do get activity is over here south of Chicago was a community, and they were running individuals across the dunes, actually across Lake Michigan. There's actually a boat that sank that underwater archaeologists have been looking for that had fugitive slaves on it, and we know some good documentation about it. So they're trying to find that, and they were moving them across because where they were trying to get them to was not South Bend, but just north of there is Cass County, Michigan. And Cassopolis was a free black settlement and a fugitive slave destination. They weren't going to Canada, they were just going to Michigan. Well, eventually the bounty hunters realized, wait a minute, they're just going to Cass County, Michigan. That's a state. We can go up there legally, arrest people, and bring them back. So that's what they're doing. So if they're going up there and arresting people there and coming back, they're coming back through Indiana. And when we get these reverse Underground Railroad types of things, we get a lot of incidences happen. One of my favorite one is in Elkhart, so right over here. And so a gentleman, bounty hunter, came and arrested a gentleman, was bringing him back through. Everybody in the neighborhood started coming out, or everybody in the town as they were coming through, were coming out. You know, we're all nosy, got to see what's going on. And the county sheriff arrested the bounty hunter for inciting a riot. And so he took then possession of or custody of the enslaved person, and said to the bounty hunter, when you prove you've done nothing wrong through the court system, you can come and have him back. So this guy's case goes through to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court rules you didn't incite a riot, you're innocent. And if you look at the documentation, there was no riot. People were just out in the streets because they're nosy. So the bounty hunter went back up to Elkhart and asked the sheriff for the fugitive back. And the sheriff's like, oh, sorry, I don't know what happened to him. He's gone. So after that, people don't go through Elkhart, but they're starting to come through South Bend. And there's several incidences that happen there of as individuals are coming through chained with bounty hunters, them trying to break them free from the grips of the bounty hunter. Somebody you may run into in South Bend is James Washington. He's a barber, that's his profession. He's a conductor, he's helping people move from station to station. And the last thing though I say is a solicitor. Now again, I don't know if you noticed that I said a couple of times that somebody a slave could bribe someone at the train or on the boat. There were individuals who were actually paid to work on the Underground Railroad. And also, we couldn't just drop individuals off in Canada and say, have a nice life, without helping them with funds, because they were never paid for their labor. So how do they buy food, clothing, land, get a life started, build churches? So there's a whole group of people who are just fundraising for the Underground Railroad, solicitors that way. So Washington was one of them, and he worked heavily with the Bartletts. This is their home. It still stands in South Bend. And this is Mrs. Bartlett. Now, we don't think anybody ever came through their home, but what we do have, and what we do think we have, is her participation as a solicitor. She annoyed her friends so much, they talked about her in their diaries. And so they would say things like, every time I go to book club, all she does is ask for me for money for the fugitives. We found a receipt for 200 pairs of work boots in her family records. That woman never wore a pair of work boots in her life. But it makes sense. If you're running from Kentucky to Canada, you're going to need a new pair of boots when you get there. So you have all these individuals doing that type of fundraising, because it was important to make sure that the Underground Railroad was helpful, useful. If these individuals, if we dropped them in Canada and then they became a nuisance for Canada and became dependent upon Canadian society, maybe they wouldn't let them stay anymore. And so we had to make sure that they had the ability to start their lives, and start fresh up in Canada. Now, I'm going to simplify the Civil War's causes to 3 events. First one was Dred Scott. Dred is a slave living in a part of the United States that's not supposed to have slavery by the Compromise of 1850. He gets a lawyer who will take his case. It goes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they rule not only is he still a slave, he had no right to sue because blacks are not citizens of this country. They didn't say slaves, they said blacks. We're going to deal with that later. And then in 59, John Brown's raided Harper's Ferry. Now, John Brown was living in Kansas. We call it Bleeding Kansas because they were skirmishing before the Civil War ever started to determine whether Nebraska was going to be, or whether Kansas was going to be a free state or a slave state. And John thought the only way to end slavery in the United States was violently. It's how it ended in Cuba and the Dominican Republic, places like that. So what he's going to do, he's going to go to Harper's Ferry. It's a federal arsenal in Virginia. And he's going to steal all the guns, give them to the slaves of Virginia, and let them do what they're going to do to their owners and to the community. John went with a lot of people. There were people, fugitive slaves came back from Canada, both men and women, to join his group to go out there. Indiana has a slight presence there. He came twice to Indiana, once to Indianapolis and once down to that Georgetown community neighborhood down in Madison, and had meetings asking people for money. We do not know who attended, but we do know that nobody went with him, but maybe they gave him money. We're not 100% certain. But the other thing that's interesting is that the governor then at the time, Lane, his nephew, who was from Ohio, actually went with him. So we do have a slight connection to what happened there. They went out there, they attempted to do this, they were all found, they were all caught and executed, even the governor's nephew. And then Lincoln. When Lincoln first ran for president, he said he was not going to do anything with slavery. It's not why he was running to begin with. And so he didn't want, he said, South, don't worry about it. Well, the South didn't believe him. He was a politician. So he's elected in November, and in December 1860, South Carolina secedes from the Union. Others joined in January of 61. And February 4th, 1861, the Confederate States of America, the South, is formed. So we get the Civil War. Now, Congress abolishes slavery in D.C. and the territories, and Lincoln offers the South a plan. Now, this first plan was just come back into the Union. We won't try anyone for treason. We will pay for we'll free your slaves by 1900. Everybody will be freed, but we'll compensate you for loss of property. And the South wanted nothing to do with this plan. So in September of 62, went into effect in January of 63, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which did not free all the slaves. I know that's what we're taught in school, but it's not exactly what it did. What it said is any person or any state or part of state in rebellion against the United States, their slaves are free. So think about that for a second. Who did he free? He freed people, or he freed people in states that thought they were no longer part of the United States and thought he was not their president. So he didn't free anybody until Union troops went in and took control. The last group of slaves freed by the Emancipation Proclamation was June 19th, 1865 in Galveston, Texas. Now, if you know anything about the war was over in April. It just took till June to get down to Galveston to let them know. Just recently, we had the summer, everybody, as the national holiday for Juneteenth. And it's the last set of slaves freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, but not the last set of slaves freed. Because what it said is states in rebellion against the United States. There were 5 states or parts of states, and that were slaveholding, but a part of the North. And the closest one to Indiana is Kentucky. So Kentucky never seceded from the Union. And some Kentuckians fought on the side of the South, some Kentuckians fought on the side of the North, but they did not secede from the Union, so their slaves were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. And once we realized that, you have these aha moments and you think, God, we're idiots. How did we not see this before? Most historians stopped doing research about 1862, 1863 because you don't need the Underground Railroad anymore. Well, since Kentuckians weren't freed, then we need it. So we started looking and found Hannah Tolliver was a woman living in Clarksville, down by Jeffersonville. She was arrested in Kentucky for helping 5 guys try to escape. And she went to jail, that same federal prison that my Elijah Anderson went to. She was eventually pardoned by the governor of Kentucky and stuff like that. But it was, again, after this Emancipation Proclamation is when she was in 64 and 65 that she's doing this and going to jail. So what that has done is opened up more years we need to do research and more things we need to look at. Our research, I just feel like will never be done. So then we don't need so then we have to change the Constitution. The 13th Amendment makes makes slavery illegal. The 14th Amendment makes anybody born in the United States a citizen, and that stems from the Dred Scott case because they said blacks were not citizens. And it's something that we deal with today with immigrants and their children being born here, but that stems from the Dred Scott case. And then the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. So now after that, we don't need the Underground Railroad, so now the historians get to work. Wilbur Siebert, he did the first research. He's the one that made this horrible map that you all now hate. And he wrote a book. He wrote a book in 1902 called The Underground Railroad from Slavery to Freedom. Extremely boring, not well written, but great original research. But not many people have read it except historians doing Underground Railroad research. Anyway, William Still. William was an African-American in Philadelphia. He actually kept notes on everybody who came through his house. And so we have like these great stories of his work and what he did and the people that he helped because he was keeping notes on them in 1872. He's getting some notoriety now and getting to know more. I just saw something on PBS about him. So he's getting some notoriety now, but early on, not a lot of people read his book. Then we have Levi and Catherine Coffin, and Levi wrote Reminiscences, which talks a lot about his Underground Railroad activity. Again, not a lot of people have read it. And then in 1961, Larry Garrett wrote this book that like blew up everything and changed how we do research. This is how we do research today. He said we should start looking at everyone and not just white Quakers, which is again makes me giggle that was groundbreaking at the time. But yeah, he said that we need to look at everybody from the white Quakers to the enslaved person and everybody in between to figure out how this really happened. So all these history books came out, but nobody read them, so they don't know the history of it. But I bet all of you have read Uncle Tom's Cabin. So I don't know if you know this, but it is fiction. Harry Beecher Stowe was a very prominent abolitionist. Her family were all abolitionists. One of her brothers was a Presbyterian minister in downtown Indianapolis. And he would, she knew everybody. So she would do, she had stories from this person and stories from that person and stories from that person, cobbled them together and wrote like a journal article. The journal was a magazine. The magazine was so popular that she wrote the book. The book was so popular it became a play. The play was so popular when we got movies, it became a movie, and everybody's seen it, but everybody knows those stories as their history. Like I said, she took stuff and made it more fantastical. And a great example of that is when Eliza crosses the river to get to Ohio. She crosses the Ohio River, and it's raging. It's a raging river with icebergs. I told you the Underground Railroad, that the river froze in the 1850s, but it was never raging and it never had icebergs. So she took a real event, made it more fantastical, more, mythical. And so, but now everybody thinks that's what it is. The other thing about this is, which I just love, is that everybody read the same page, chapter page, and things said, oh my God, they're talking about our community. And you can read these in the newspapers all over the United States. The same paragraph, 14 or 15 different communities are saying, oh, that's us. That's us. Even so, I was like, it can't be all of us. But it's a conglomeration of us. And she put this together. So people, if you see some of the myths and stuff like that, it's like it came straight out of Uncle Tom's Cabin. The stories are word for word sometimes of what happened in their community. But again, nobody's read the history. They've only read this. Now, after that Larry Guerra book, nothing really happened too much on the history until 1998. 1998, Congress mandated the National Park Service to create a park, like a Gettysburg, for the Underground Railroad. But they realized pretty easily and pretty quickly that there's not enough research done. There's more things that need to happen. And so what they did is they challenged each state. Because remember, I told you our office has responsibilities to the state or to the Park Service. Every state has one of our offices. So they challenged all of us to do research at our level. And I am proud to say Indiana was the only state to take up the charge at the government level. Other states had non-for-profits and things like that, but at the government level, we were the only ones to say, okay, we'll do this, because there was no funds attached. So we started doing research. We knew we could not do it all. And so we started a committee, which has now grown to be its own non-for-profit. It's called Indiana Freedom Trails. And so there are individuals in there who maybe care about one building, maybe their church and their denomination. Others, it's about a family. Others, it's about their county. But we all do research. We always share stories and research sources and commiserate with each other and things like that. And all we're trying to do is just put a more complete history together of Hoosiers and what Hoosiers were up to. So there in an hour is 300 years of history. There's a little bit of information for me. We have information on our website of stories and things like that. We're going to start growing our Underground Railroad stuff this year on the website. So keep coming back, because more and more of the stories that I've been talking about are going to go up, and more stories that I even didn't get to talk about are going to start going up. You can also follow us on Facebook, and so in September, be the first time ever, is the International Underground Railroad Month. And so starting in September on Facebook, we will be having lots and lots of stories about Underground Railroad activity around the state and who was doing what. And I like to talk about people who no one talks about. So I won't put up Levi Coffin, because we've all heard about him. I'll put something up about somebody that no one's ever heard of, so that we can get that story out. So I am going to end my sharing so you can all come back and see me again. And I apologize for the lights going on and off, but I'm at work and they're on a timer. And so if I don't move, but I thought if I did that during my talk, you might think I was crazy. So I will open it up to questions, to chat. I can just go into the chat and see who's got what.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions there.
What's the source of link? So the that Underground Railroad map is from the book that Wilbur Siebert wrote. It's the main book that he has in there. And then again, in every state that he has covered in there, they will have their letters. The letters are all in Ohio at the Ohio Historical Society. For Indiana, they're at the state library. But I made an intern, because I'm mean to my interns, index it. So the Indiana ones are indexed. So you can go onto our website and look at the index. So you don't have to. So Tom, if you're looking for the Lytle, is it Lytle? How it's pronounced? Yeah. So if you're looking for Lytles, you can go in and see if Lytle's even mentioned. So yeah. I made an intern do that one year. She didn't like me after that. The name of the book that is for the Bill Munn is The Underground Railroad: Research in Select Indiana Counties, And Rhonda, I think you guys have a copy of this.
Yes, we have all of the ones that's been
Yeah.
published, I believe.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's Bill's stuff. And he worked a lot with his students, did a lot of good research. Again, there's more I think we need to pull together. And I know he's done more research since we put this together. So it'd be nice, maybe if that's something 22 I'll work on, is that maybe we can get something compiled and get it printed, even if it's just electronically, so we can put out more of his research, because I am a fan of getting that research out. Doesn't do us any good to do the research and not share with everybody.
Right.
The Shugart family, yes, Bill talks about them heavily in here about the Shugarts and what they were doing, and I will tell you which ones they are so that I'm not. Yeah, this morning I was going to like reread this and get all, and then something happens. So it was John Shugart who was the main person who was working. He was also a friend, a Quaker, and doing his work. And we have to be careful about Quakers. And I'm not saying Shugarts this way, but we have to be careful about saying all Quakers are Underground Railroad or even abolitionists. Some Quaker churches read people out, which is excommunicating them for participating in abolitionist activities, not just Underground Railroad. So this Quaker religion is a unique thing. If you're looking for Quaker research, if you'd like more on the Shugarts and what they were doing, Earlham College is where to go. Earlham College has an archives that is amazing. It's over in Richmond, Indiana, and Tom Hamm, Hamm, is their archivist, and the man is amazing. He walks on water for me. Tom knows Quaker history better than anybody else. He knows Indiana Quaker history better than anybody else, and is a wealth of information. And so that story of Peter and all that stuff about the trial and the beaten Peter, I spent weeks at his archives going through. He has the papers of the family who did this work and stuff like that. So if you've got Quakers like the Shugarts, you can do that. Actually, Wabash County, again, Wabash County, wealth of information. So if you are if you have somebody you think is on Underground Railroad, go to Wabash County, because there's stuff in that paper, because that paper was anti-slavery, the owner was, and they have a lot of good resources. But the stuff in the Wabash talks about Shugart and the stuff that he was doing here, or I guess there, I'm not here, but they're in Grant County. Yeah, unfortunately, somebody said that the farmhouse was across from the airport and it was torn down. Unfortunately, a lot of the houses have been torn down. They fell apart, you know. They weren't the great houses on the top of the hill that everybody wanted to save. And so they just kind of got torn down with everything else. You know, so then I don't reference the cellar, or not me. Bill did not reference the cellar in his work. So it may have been a place that people, you know, spent the night and stuff like that, but it was probably more that they were on the floor in a bed, maybe in the barn, things like that, as a place to spend the nights, things like that. All right. Oh, what else we got? All right. Anybody else have any questions?
I think Lynn Ann just asked about the Wabash County. One named Kindley.
Yes, Kinley is a name that I know. I'd have to look the stuff up to get exact, but Kinley is a name I do know. And we have stuff on him. So if you're interested and it's something you want more, just give me a holler. You guys can email me. Email is the best way to get me, because summer I'm in the field a lot, but I'll send you any of the stuff I have. I'll make copies and send it to you, PDF it, whatever. Because again, I'm a big fan of getting it to people. Doesn't do me any good to have it here in my office. So if you're interested in that, just give me an email, and I will be happy to send it on to you. So
could you give us your email address?
yes, it's everybody ready? Pens up. All right, JRDINIUS, okay, at So it's J.R. Dinius. And if you look on the screen, you can see my last name. It's a big E last name, but the Dinius is the one that what they kept. And at dnr.in.gov. Because my husband is from the area, he's from Huntington County. So it might be a name that you recognize, the Dinius name. So
if you have trouble, you could just email us or call the Indiana room.
Yeah, I've known Rhonda and her staff and Renee and Debbie for what?
I've known you since I worked there. It's been 20 years, I think.
Yeah,
So,
I just celebrated my 21st year with the state. So
yeah, I contacted you about cemetery. We did our
Yes.
first cemetery workshop. So since then, yeah, that's been 20 years ago.
yeah,
So
I've got a question.
yes.
Levi Coffin in his autobiography does several paragraphs describing the largest group of refugees, freedom seekers he had worked with, a group of 17 that he sent to Grant County. And if I remember correctly, I think there might be some of the Grant County histories that refer to that event or something very similar. I just wonder if anybody's been able to date this group of 17 that were safely sent to Grant County and were not apprehended.
I don't know if anybody's ever actually dated that or not. I might let me talk to the Levi Coffin House, part of the State Museum. They do a lot of research, so I can ask them, and then I'll send it on to Rhonda, and she can let the group know next month on that. I'm curious it'd be interesting to see when the county history came out compared to when Levi's came out, to see, are they just talking about his story that they read, or is it something that they remember from a local thing? Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, some like, oh, well, then there was this group of 17, and did anybody even notice it? And again, then it'd be interesting that where they came across, kind of what counties and stuff like that. But I can ask Joanna, who's the director over at the Coffin House.
Right. Thank you.
Take a note here, otherwise I'll forget.
County histories for 1886 and 1912.
So 86 would have been after his reminiscence came out, because his reminiscence I think came out in 76. I think that's right. So it'd be interesting, yeah, if there's anything that happened local, or if people are just like, oh, well, look, he talked about it, so we remember it now.
And unfortunately, the earliest papers we have in Grant County are 1867.
That is not helpful.
It's not helpful. No, it is not helpful for many people.
So then what I would do is seriously look at the Wabash papers, Wabash County paper. And now you also looking at the Huntington County papers, it's an interesting comparison. Some things may have happened that you didn't realize on the bad side, the bad side of history. I'm a big fan of showing the complexity of it, and it wasn't just all people helping. And then we wouldn't have needed an underground railroad if everyone was helping. So you've got the helping people, but you've got the people turning people in. And so the Huntington paper is great for that kind of stuff. Very useful, very, very necessary. My next, I finished my, I did a thesis on the colonizationist people, because I find them fascinating and odd all at the same time. And so now I'm going to start working on those bounty hunters. Because I know that if we understand them, we'll know more history about it, because they just show up places and new things. And I'm like, how's that possible? But we also have people showing up and doing things on the Underground Railroad that just blow my mind. We had a gentleman in Nashville, Tennessee, who shipped himself to Levi Coffin. How did he know to ship himself to Levi Coffin? And at this time, Levi's living in Cincinnati. Just an amazing thing of things that people knew, and things because we think, well, it's so easy, it's on the internet like that. They didn't have that kind of stuff. And so how do you get from Cincinnati, Ohio down to Nashville, Tennessee to someone to know that to ship yourself, and here's where to ship yourself to? So
one other, go ahead.
Well, excuse me. You said you wrote a paper on colonization.
I wrote a 500-page thesis, yes.
Oh.
do nothing small. But yeah, on colonizationists and looking at the movement, and what I did is looked at who the local leaders were. And so who are the people on the town councils, kind of a thing, who are supporting so maybe, Rhonda, you have me back and I'll do a thing on colonization for everyone.
Okay.
It disturbs people because, I mean, Levi Coffin was engaged with colonization, and his nephew was, and then, you know, we get some of the best Underground Railroad people that we thought were like these amazing people who then are quite racist. So it's fascinating. So.
Wow. I mean, is this published work?
Oh, not yet. You know, it'll be on ScholarWorks as soon as I get my button gear and get the stuff submitted to ScholarWorks. But yeah, then I want to do something with it, because actually what I want to do is make sure every genealogy society in the state has a copy of it, because again, it's not research that you would know that you would do as a genealogist, because I had to go to DC to look at the papers of the American Colonization Society, and their papers are in the National Archives. But that's not something you're going to be doing, and you wouldn't, you know, and you're not going to read through every issue of this stupid journal that they had to look at who's donating money. So it's something I want to work on. I need to get. It's my 22 goal. So.
Jeannie,
Yes.
this is Lynn. Hi. You had mentioned the slave catchers, the bounty hunters, and I am curious whether you might know, down in Wayne County, it mentions that William Bush was appointed the head guy to confront these slave catchers when they came into town.
Okay.
And I was wondering if you might know a year that actually happened. I know it had to have been, would it have necessarily have been before 1850? Were they doing that then?
Oh yeah, they were okay. As soon as fugitives were running from the plantation, there were people chasing them. I mean, okay. Yeah, so I mean, I would do it more of when was he around, and so started at that. But yeah, no, bounty hunters have been around as long as people started running. As soon as people took the that initiative to free themselves, they were sending people after them. Because the Peter case was 24, and I actually looked into when we were doing the research for Peter. You can go, it's the township trustee books that you look at, and they still have them, luckily, and there were dozens of cases going in front of the trustee not the trustee, the justice of the peace. It was dozens of people going in front of the justice of the peace to have these to prove that this person was the slave that they said it was, and stuff. So, and that's in the 1820s.
Okay.
So.
Okay. But this was mentioned as like a big occurrence, like it was something different than usual. And they were going to come in and burn the town down. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going. Keep going.
They were supposedly there. They were going to burn the town down, and they were confronted by a group of, primarily, the way I have read it anyway, black men.
Okay. And
William Bush being the head guy.
So
there was reference to it.
I would look at newspapers from the time period. And so if you don't have newspapers.com, Rhonda, do you guys have a copy or have a version?
I have newspapers.com and newspaper archives both.
Okay, so do some word searches looking for an account of it in the paper. So was William Bush Quaker?
No, he was black.
Well, you can be black and be Quaker.
But no.
Okay.
Not that I have found in the records anyway.
Okay, because the Quakers, gossipy keepers of everything. I love them for that because they made it so nice, because he may have gotten in trouble for that. If you were a Quaker. So I would start with the newspapers and see if there was an incident reported in the paper. And I would not just check the Wayne County papers, but I would check the national anti-slavery papers. So the North Star, which was Frederick Douglass's paper, the Philanthropist, which was over in Illinois. Actually, I have a list of all the newspapers that were the anti-slavery newspapers, and where in the universities. So if they're not yet scanned, like on newspapers.com, which universities have copies of them, microfilm, so you could go looking through there. So when you ask me about Wabash County, when you email me, put a note in there, can I have the list of anti-slavery newspapers? And I can send you those. Because we had a bunch in Indiana. We had a bunch of anti-slavery newspapers. Arnold Buffin, who was a Quaker, came in and he got people doing stuff. So it might have been so it may not have been in the mainstream newspapers, but it may have been in the anti-slavery newspapers. But yeah, the North Star and the Philanthropist were the two biggies, but there were a lot of other ones. Depending on the date that it was, it could even be something where we look into the, there were two Black newspapers in Canada. One by a woman, I want to say Mary Chad, her name's I'll think of it driving home. So there were two newspapers up there. So depending on the time, they may have covered it up there too. So I can give you all these newspapers. And again, going into word searches and stuff like that in the newspaper might help. So.
And we do have newspapers.com and newspaper archives. We just have the Indiana newspapers right now, but we will be, I think it's in October, we were able to subscribe to the world subscription of newspaper archives. So we will have all of the newspapers around the world that they have. They had a special deal.
Nice, good. And they're amazing. And the thing about the newspapers you have to remember is time periods, what words were used. You don't look up African American. That's not a word that's going to be used in the 1850s. So your wording is going to make sure when you're doing your searches, you're searching that way. And then you have to just be creative, like maybe not do, William Bush, he may not have been discussed. I might just say a Black man or a Negro man from Wayne County. So do Wayne County, do Richmond, do all these different searches to see if anything pops up. I know that there were several Quakers who confronted politicians over in Wayne County. It's like Henry Clay came through and gave a speech, and 3 Quakers confronted him about owning slaves, and they were excommunicated from the church read out for the church for that. So there's people doing that type of stuff over in Wayne County. So I'm not surprised if they decided to confront the bounty hunters. Good for them. So yeah, just remember when you email me, remind me to attach that, and I can give you that. So again, I have interns all the time, and I'm like, I would really like to have a list of this. So why don't you create that for me? So that's what interns are good for.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Tom, you had a question?
There's a catch-22. There's many old Black communities like Weaver in Indiana that have oral tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yet
you're prioritizing documentation.
Yep.
Can you talk about that balance?
It is a difficult balance because yes, and this is something that's talked about at the national level at conferences and stuff all the time. It's just that we have to be able to prove what we say, especially given Underground Railroad is so heavily steeped in myth and stuff. And so a lot of times, we look at how far back the tradition goes, who's telling it, how consistent the stories are, things like that help. And then what you can do is through primary documents, prove as much as you can. If you're saying that, John Doe did this in Grant County, well, okay, let's just prove John Doe lived there. So there's some proving you can do other ways that bolster the story. But yes, that is, again, that's been a long time thing of this oral traditions, and that some communities, and African American communities, one of them that has a stronger oral tradition in general about their history, because their history hasn't been told by the mainstream white historian community. So it's heavily kept its own history that way. So then when I'm working with a group that way, it's like, okay, just prove what you can, so that you can say, well, yes, I can't prove that that actual event happened, but the person lived where I said he did, when I said he did. You know, there's these 6 things that we can prove that bolsters the story. Yes, it is. Yes, that has been for a good 20 years that we've been in my office. We also have programs in relationships and things with Native American communities. Again, another strong oral traditions that way. And so it's just trying to balance it, because we want the history to be accurate. We don't want myths. We don't want lies. We want, the truth out there. Teachers, I tell them all the time, I got gun battles. I could make this interesting for 4th graders. So let's not make things up. So we got to have a standard of that documentation to make sure that everything is solid. And then again, we get my grandpas of the world, bless their hearts, but we get my grandpas of the world to make up stories to entertain the kids. And we need to kind of work through those.
What is unique about early Indiana Black communities is the fact that there is incredible motivation to help those on the Underground Railroad, which I would think would add a little bit of weight to those oral traditions.
Yes, and again, it's a mixed bag for the African Americans participating, because okay, if I'm participating, I get fined, maybe I get sued. African American participating could actually be sold into slavery. So it's more for them. It's more personal for them. They probably have family members who they know who are still enslaved, kind of things like that. And so yes, so again, it just goes back to proving what we can prove about, okay, was that person living there? I have a good example. It's not an African American, but it's a white gentleman up in Marshall County, who the community had for years. His house, it's Underground Railroad. Look at all the wonderful stuff he did. Well, he didn't move into the county until 1880. So he was probably doing Underground Railroad work, but not in Marshall County. So again, we have just to make sure that we prove what we can, to balance the lack of that smoking gun kind of a thing.
Tom and I have an uncle in common who was, family tradition says, was in the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
Now, what I noticed is that so many of the names that we believe were in Grant County, they're all come from the 1880 history or later, or making of a township. And they're all, I remember Dad, I remember Grandpa, I remember seeing the slaves in the barn, and so on. And our uncle was sent by the Wesleyan Church out to Iowa in 1863. So all the people that went around Grant County in later years, when people were finally, willing to confess that they'd been in the Underground Railroad, they missed a lot of people that left the county.
Yes. Yes.
That's what we struggle with. We have an oral tradition, and we can look and see that, our uncle has ties to the Weaver community, in fact, through an autobiography of Thomas P. Weaver, through the fact that his father-in-law had some of the Weaver community in his household or employed, something like that. So we've got all the pieces there. So how much weight can you give to family tradition?
Again, it goes back to basically what you need is write down your story and then see what of it can you prove. And you say, you say the family tradition says he was living in Marion. Was he living in Marion? Or was he living in Jonesboro? So if you've got that wrong, okay, there's an issue there. You just need to kind of piece it through. And I'm gonna tell you what, there are some people who we just don't know and we'll never know, who I am like 99% certain in my heart that person participated, but I have never been able to find anything that proves it one way or the other. And again, we never stop researching because things always pop up. I have people all the time saying, well, you just, how do you find new resources? Because a library opened up a box and it was like, oh, where'd that come from? And they had all of a sudden have papers and diaries and things like that. So, we're going to hope one day that somebody in their attic is going to bring down the diary that your, great, great, great aunt wrote watching her family do this. That's what we're hoping for. Otherwise, it might be that it's just that smoking gun, but I think being honest about what you've got and what you don't have. We can prove these things. We can't prove these things. These things are family legend. These things are family legend, and we can prove they're wrong. So like being honest about all aspects of it and what you got that's good, what you got that's bad. And then that way it gives weight to your stuff. If you just say, well, it's true because grandma said it was, well, then I'm not going to believe you at all. But if you kind of go through and say, okay, we got this and this and this and this, and we know this and we don't know this. Yeah. So I agree, because it basically, there are some people who never spoke about it. So they're never going to be talked about ever. I mean, we're never going to know about them because they were quiet or they died or moved before the war was over.
Well, certainly at the time, they didn't want to talk about it.
Right after the war, it was really after Reconstruction. So about 1880s, it became popular. All of a sudden it was like, oh wait, Underground Railroad became very, what's the word? Very romanticized. And I think because there was a new surge on Uncle Tom's Cabin, it became a play. It became a traveling play. It became the play every high school did, kind of a thing. And then it resurged again in the 1930s when movies came out. We did another Uncle Tom's Cabin, and then we got Gone with the Wind and movies like that. And so you get a new surge of things, and people start remembering things that Limberlost, what's her Jean Stratton Porter. Yeah. She makes claims about seeing things and doing things Underground Railroad. She was not old enough. I believe she's born after the war. So you've got people remembering things erroneously. Memory is an interesting thing. It's a big topic in the history community of how public memory and how people remember things. So again, going back to being honest with your resources and what you know and you don't know. And if something comes along and proves that your ancestor or your family story is not true, it's okay. It doesn't mean something good or bad. It just is. And you just move on to being honest about it. I think it's the best thing you can do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jeannie. We appreciate you coming and speaking to us again. We will have you back again. We've got another topic here. We'll have to.
Yeah, we do colonization. I'm sure I can come up with something else too.
I think you have a lot of other ones we haven't even explored yet. So we'll keep you in mind for that. Don't forget. Yes, Tom.
Thank you so much. I have to ask this question. Bill Munn has given me an answer, but a source about Indiana history and Blacks and free Blacks within the state exists as a result of the 1851 anti-Black constitutional amendment in Indiana. Yep. And question, is there any chance of finding in Indiana archives the petition of the Grant County citizens who protested that amendment? Are there any county records for who could or couldn't serve on a jury because they had a Black ancestor?
That's a good question.
The group what I would look for the petition is at the state archives to the Constitutional Convention records. So if anybody sent a letter or sent a petition, it should still be in there. Now they are only open for appointments only, so you have to call ahead and stuff like that. But I went through some of those records for my thesis on the colonization, because there was so no new Black could move into Indiana, but the state created the Indiana Colonizationist Board and stuff. So I went through some of the records. So there's some stuff. So there's a lot there. I mean, that I went through like that much of it, and there's like that much of it. So petitions and things like that to see. You can get the voting record, not of every individual, but the aggregate of the county. So you can see how well you voted for or against it. I can tell you only 4 counties voted against it. That constitutional amendment says Article 13 was parsed out. So they made everyone vote for the Constitution and Article 13. They didn't put it all together. And so you can see how the county as a whole voted, but only, I think it's 4 counties had more individuals vote no for Article 13 than
I think
not.
Grant County was one.
I don't think so. It was DeKalb and Steuben and Noble. Wayne County was not one of them. I'd have to look and see. But yeah, that's all that's available through the state archives. So, yep.
Great. And I will tell you, Jeannie is right. Libraries find things all the time. It was there. It was us. We found something just a week and a half ago at our library and museum that we're working on. It is a 16 feet of a scroll that details Miami Indian history. We do not know who wrote it. We don't know any provenance on it. We're waiting for the Indiana Historical Society to help us with conserving it before we try to do anything with it, because it's in very fragile shape. So things are found all the time.
All the time, yeah.
Or something stuck inside a book, a letter or something that nobody knew was there. So keep looking.
Yep.
So, well, we're let you go tonight. Let's go back up the top of the chat, those links to register for the next 2 programs. We'd love to have you back for that. The next one on the 9th will just be a sharing question time. We're just going to talk and see if we can help solve some problems. And then the 23rd would be Bill Munn talking about the mills in Grant County.
And then you can bug them about the Underground Railroad stuff too.
Okay,
So.
we will. Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming. And
Thank you,
Jeannie,
everyone.
Appreciate you again, and we will have you back, definitely.
All right.
Have a good evening.